On June 24th, 2006, Gilbert Mark Gilman pulled his Thunderbird into the Staircase Ranger Station at Olympic National Park. He told a ranger he was headed out for a quick 20-minute walk to photograph the river, leaving his wallet and cell phone on the passenger seat. He'd be right back. Yet he never returned. 10 days of thermal sweeps and K9 units followed, but the search teams came up empty. It's as if Gilman didn't just wander off. He simply stopped. Not a single footprint remained. His gear had seemingly evaporated, and even the bloodhounds couldn't pull a trace of a scent from the air. Gilman's case is a haunting introduction to a much darker pattern. Today, we're exploring 4 of the most unsettling disappearances in Olympic National Park. The reason Gilman's case is so haunting is because of where it happened. The staircase isn't some untamed, impenetrable jungle. It's a destination. Named for the cedar steps built in the 1890s to bypass a massive rock outcropping, the area is a hub of activity with a ranger station, a developed campground, and a network of trails so well maintained they feel almost suburban. This wasn't a place where a seasoned traveler gets lost. It was a place where people follow a path. And Gilbert Gilman was a man of the path. As the deputy director of Seattle's Department of Transportation, his life was built on logistics and the predictability of infrastructure. At 47, he was a high-level professional and a former U.S. Army paratrooper with intelligence experience in Yemen and Mongolia. He wasn't a novice. He understood terrain and calculated risk. When he told that ranger he'd be back in 20 minutes, he wasn't guessing. He was stating a plan. That plan hit a wall the moment his boots touched the dirt. When professional search teams arrived with bloodhounds, dogs capable of tracking a scent through a thunderstorm, they encountered a total dead end. The dogs didn't lead the handlers into the woods or pull toward the river. Instead, they reached the very edge of the parking lot, paced in frustrated circles, and sat down. To the dogs, Gilman's physical existence ended the second he left the asphalt. This creates a terrifying mathematical problem. Gilman was carrying a professional camera and a heavy metal tripod, clunky equipment that snags on ferns and leaves gouges in moss. Yet, as searchers moved in shoulder-to-shoulder grids through that 20-minute radius, they found nothing. There were no lens caps, no scuff marks, and no broken branches. It was as if he hadn't walked into the forest, but had been lifted out of it. The silence left behind eventually fueled a decade of dark speculation. Some pointed towards serial killer Israel Keyes, who was known to frequent the Pacific Northwest. Others looked at Gilman's military intelligence background, wondering if his secrets had finally caught up with him. But the official record remains chillingly blank. In 2012, a court declared him legally dead, ending the search, but leaving one question wide open. How does a man with a tripod and a plan vanish in the time it takes to boil an egg? If Gilbert Gilman's disappearance was a masterclass in total erasure, the case of Hunter Fraser was a study in the surreal. In June 2023, Fraser, a 44-year-old Stanford University biology professor, an experienced solo hiker, set out for a 40-mile trek through the Olympic National Park. He wasn't a novice. He was a man who understood the meticulous logistics of the backcountry, equipped with a Garmin satellite device and the physical conditioning required for the park's most unforgiving terrain. His route began at the Deer Ridge Trailhead, a path defined by steep elevation and, at that time of year, unpredictable spring snowpacks. When he failed to return, as scheduled on June 7th, the National Park Service launched a massive search and rescue operation. For 4 days, nearly 100 personnel scoured the high ridges and dense drainage basins. They found nothing. No gear, no tracks, and no signal from his GPS device. Then, on the 4th day, the narrative defied the typical lost hiker trajectory. Fraser didn't just reappear. He walked out under his own power. He was located by a family of hikers near the Dos Wallops River Trail, miles from where he was last seen. He was disoriented, missing his backpack, and lacked his prescription eyeglasses, leaving him nearly blind in a wilderness where every step requires precision. While Gilman left behind a total void, Fraser returned with a fractured memory of the days he had lost to the mountain. The reality of his survival was as harrowing as any ghost story. Fraser reported that on the second day of his trip, he slipped on a snowy slope and struck his head, resulting in a severe concussion. The impact triggered a dreamlike dissociative state. For the next 3 days, he wandered the wilderness with no sense of time or identity, having no memory of where he slept or how he navigated the technical, near-freezing terrain without his equipment. The mystery of Hunter Fraser isn't about where he went, but how he survived. To endure 3 nights of exposure in a state of clinical confusion without a tent or a sleeping bag is a feat of human resilience that borders on the impossible. While Gilman's story ended at the edge of the asphalt, Fraser's return served as a reminder that the Olympic Peninsula doesn't just take people. Sometimes it breaks them and sends them back with questions that have no answers. In April 2017, 22-year-old Jacob Gray pedaled his bicycle into the Sol Duc Valley, deep within the rain-soaked heart of the park. Jacob wasn't just a casual tourist. He was a fit, capable young man carrying a field-ready kit, including a compound bow and a quiver of arrows. He was prepared to live off the land. But on a Tuesday afternoon, a ranger found his bicycle leaning neatly against a guardrail along the Sol Duc River Road. What followed wasn't a lack of clues, but a collection of them that defied any logical sequence. Scattered along the bank of the freezing turquoise river, searchers found Jacob's gear laid out in a way that felt almost ritualistic. His bow and arrows were left on the rocks. His sleeping bag was found nearby, alongside a heavy 4-gallon bucket he'd been using to carry supplies. There was a total absence of struggle. Not a single drop of blood or torn fabric was found on the jagged river stones. It looked as if he had simply unburdened himself of everything necessary for survival and stepped into the water. The initial theory was simple. Jacob had fallen into the Sol Duc and been swept away. But the river was unseasonably shallow that week, and despite divers checking every logjam and deep pool for miles downstream, they found nothing. He wasn't in the water. He wasn't in the immediate forest. The trail he left behind at the riverbank was a dead end that pointed toward a drowning that never happened. The true break in the case didn't come until 16 months later, and it made the scene at the river seem like a deliberate misdirection. In the summer of 2018, a team of biologists working on a remote, high-altitude ridge found Jacob's remains. He wasn't in the valley, and he hadn't been swept downstream. He was found at an elevation of over 5,000 feet, miles away from his bike and gear, in a rugged area that required a grueling vertical ascent. To this day, investigators are left with a chilling contradiction. Why would an experienced outdoorsman abandon his survival gear and his only means of transport at the bottom of a canyon, only to climb thousands of feet into the subalpine wilderness with nothing but the clothes on his back? It was a trail that started with a neat row of belongings and ended in a place where he never should have been able to reach. In July 2017, Zach Krull, a fit and experienced hiker from Seattle, set out for a solo trek through the Sol Duc Valley. Zach wasn't a novice. He was a man who grew up in the Pacific Northwest, intimately familiar with the unpredictable weather and the vertical terrain of the Olympics. He parked his car, shouldered a pack containing a week's worth of high-end gear, and stepped onto a trail that thousands of tourists navigate every summer. The mystery began not with a disappearance, but with a total lack of a destination. When Zach failed to return, the search effort was massive, involving specialized mountain rescue teams and aerial surveillance. They focused on the High Divide, a breathtaking but dangerous ridge that Zach was known to favor. As they scoured the alpine meadows and the dense hemlock forests, they encountered a total absence of any camp signature. There wasn't a single flattened patch of grass where his tent had been pitched. His cooking stove was nowhere to be found, and investigators couldn't find a single witness who had seen him after he left the trailhead. It was as if he had walked 100 yards into the woods and simply evaporated. The most disturbing detail of the Krull case, however, didn't emerge for 11 years. A few months later, a group of hikers moving through a remote off-trail drainage area stumbled upon a discovery that felt like a deliberate taunt from the landscape. They found Zach's backpack. The pack wasn't shredded or buried. It was sitting in a rugged, impenetrable section of the forest. While the initial discovery of the gear without nearby remains sparked chilling theories about why a seasoned hiker would be separated from his survival kit, the mystery was eventually resolved by the landscape itself. The breakdown of logic was actually a consequence of the environment. In May 2018, nearly a year after the backpack was found, search teams recovered Zach's remains at the base of a nearby ravine. Evidence suggested that he had likely been caught in an avalanche or suffered a catastrophic fall in the snowy vertical terrain. He hadn't abandoned the concept of being found. Rather, he had been overcome by the sheer physical volatility of the Olympic Mountains during a late spring snowstorm. 4 stories, spanning just a few short years, all sharing the same impossible DNA. Whether it's a deputy director vanishing in the time it takes to boil an egg, or a seasoned hiker leaving his life behind in a remote ravine, Olympic National Park continues to operate by its own rules. These aren't just accidents, they are gaps in the world that never quite close back up. If you found these stories as gripping as I did, please consider subscribing to the channel. I am just getting started on this journey into the unknown, and I'll be bringing you a new video every single week.